Hello, everyone. Welcome to Wind Down Wednesdays. I'm your host, Paula Taylor, and this is episode 184. So it's been a couple weeks since my last full-length episode, and just a little reminder that if you want more episodes and you want access to the powerful activations that I share with each episode, you can join the Spiritual Awakening Sanctuary, my online community. It's only $11 a month, and you will have access to all the bonus episodes, as well as those activations and other discounts and meetups. Beautiful community of like-hearted individuals. We'd love to have you join us. So part of the reason it's been a couple weeks since my last full episode is because I knew I needed to do this episode that we're going to do today. It's been a while since I've done a What's the Deal With episode. Those are sometimes some of my favorite. It's kind of an ongoing series when I talk about something that maybe you have heard of in the spiritual realm, but maybe don't know much about, or you have some questions about. And it's very interesting. I had a question from someone in the Spiritual Awakening Sanctuary about this very topic right before I was getting ready to talk about it. So last week I did a short bonus episode just for the community where I answered this question kind of briefly. And then I said I was going to have a story to illustrate it when I was ready to talk about it. So today we're doing What's the Deal with Karmic Clearing? And I'll talk a little bit about what I mean by that. And then I have a really amazing story to illustrate that. And it took me a little while to process this. This was a huge event, a huge happening, a huge shift for me. And so I was in the midst of processing it. There's also multiple layers to this. And it's important to understand that when we're doing things like karmic clearing, there are usually multiple layers. Spiritual work in general, that's why I call it excavation. You excavate a layer, and then beneath that, there's another layer. So I think I'm going to probably do a couple of episodes around this event that happened to me, this karmic clearing that I did, so that I can talk more in depth about these different layers. Some of that is just for the sake of time. Some of it is just to make things more understandable. So today I'm going to stick with what I was thinking of as the surface layer, but like much of spiritual work, there's nothing really surface about any of this. And even talking about just this like one layer of this huge karmic clearing that I did, it has completely changed everything for me. And that's why this is so important. So just briefly, let's talk about like what is karma and what do I mean by karmic clearing, and then I'll go into the story. And I think that you can use the term karma for different things. There's a more probably precise definition of this from the religion it came out of, which is Hinduism, as far as I know. I'm not even an expert in any of that. What we have come collectively to refer to it as is this idea of sort of having energetic baggage. That's the way I'm going to talk about this. And I think there are different types of karma. There's ancestral karma. So there's these like patterns of energetic holding that we've inherited from those who came before us, both through our DNA, through our blood lineage, as well as through our energetic lineage. And then there's this idea of sort of personal karma that comes through from past lives. That's what we're going to focus on today. That's what my story is about. And essentially all of this, sometimes we think of karma as being like punitive, this idea of like, if I do something wrong in this life, I'm going to be punished in the next life. And that's not really helpful. I don't find that to be helpful. And actually my story will illustrate that. So I'm like, oh, how much do I say before I just get into this? And am I stalling? Because I sometimes do that when something's really big or difficult to talk about. But I do want to say that I think, to me, the way this makes the most sense is to think about this as vibration, as frequency. That's my jam, right? Vibration, frequency, in the form of sound, in the form of energy, it's all vibration. So when we are born into a specific life, that life is completely unique. This personality self of Paula is completely unique. Now, I have had multiple other lives where I had other personality selves that are not Paula. They're separate from Paula. However, we all share the same soul. So this is this idea that you have a soul or a higher self that is coming back repeatedly in these different lives as different people to experience different things. And now I'm talking specifically in this episode and my story about human past lives. We have quantum origin past lives. So I have a life that I can remember as a Mintakan being, that was a physical being on a planet around the star Mintaka that I've talked about a little bit before, this beautiful sort of watery fluid that was unconditional love. I've talked about the body. There's a couple of Mintakan activations on my website if that calls to you. And so we have lots of different origins. I'm focusing on human origins in this particular episode, in this particular story. But from all of these different past and parallel lives, we create energetic patterns. And those patterns are carried through. Even though the personality self is not, the patterns are carried through. And what's happening now for a lot of people more than ever before is that we can remember these past lives. And one of the questions I got in my spiritual awakening sanctuary was kind of like, how can I remember? And why do I need to? Why is this important? How does this inform my current life? Maybe I've come in with a clean slate and I don't need to know that stuff. And the very definition of karma means that you haven't come in with a clean slate. You've come in with these energetic patterns, ancestral patterns, past life patterns, quantum origin patterns. And if you want to experience life fully as this personality self, it is very helpful to recognize these patterns and sometimes to clear them, because it gives you true free will. We do have free will, but we have all this programming that comes through even in this lifetime, all the rules we were taught as a child that maybe didn't resonate with us, but we have internalized. We talk about that a lot on the show. This is essentially like an extension of that idea. So we're not just looking at this lifetime anymore. We're looking at other lifetimes. And eventually we're looking at maybe starseed origins and angelic origins and all these quantum origins that make up what our soul is, the experiences that our soul or higher self has had. And in order to serve that soul or higher self, we come through as these distinct personality selves. And if we want to fully embody those selves and really be who we are and have free will and make decisions about who we want to be in this lifetime, sometimes it's important to recognize and clear some of that karma. And this story will really illustrate that. If this seems kind of abstract and you're like, I don't know what you're talking about. The other thing I'm going to do, just to make things simple, we are going to talk about all this in linear terms of time that humans understand. So from a quantum perspective, there is no past, there's no future. Like, it's just, time is not linear. It's really hard to wrap your mind around that as a human being. And it just makes sense to kind of talk about these as past lives, even though perhaps they're really parallel lives. The life I'm going to talk about happened a long time ago compared to where we are now in history. And so it makes the most sense. It's the easiest to kind of just conceptualize this as a past life, as something that's already happened. However, just briefly, we know that things that we do in the present, I almost said future, things that we do in the present affect not only the future, but also the past. I heard this amazing story. This woman was talking about, or that it was a TikTok, but they were talking about how they were doing this kind of quantum work of sending energy of love into their past in this human lifetime. And this one person shared a story that they were thinking of taking their own life when they were a teenager. When they were a teenager. I'm studying Spanish and I feel like my brain is like, what am I doing? How do I speak? What is grammar? So, and I think I've mentioned this in a TikTok and or maybe on the show before, but this woman was talking about how the reason that she didn't go through with it when she was younger is because she felt this outpouring of love, and she felt this feeling like she was here for a reason, and this faith that things would get better and that she was completely enveloped in love. And that's what they were doing in the present, which was this younger woman's version of the future. So there were this idea, they sort of presented this idea that by sending loving energy from the future into the past, that woman in the past actually felt that. And that is what helped her shift and decide to keep going. So this work has real life impacts. However we're doing it, it absolutely does. That's just a little short example. Okay, so I'm going to get into my story. And again, I'm going to kind of stick with the one sort of layer of excavation, and then we may go deeper on that in future episodes, or that may be something that comes in bonus episodes. So I'm going to start in the past and move my way to the present just to try to make this make the most sense. So the first time I had a memory of a past life in this lifetime, I was about 20, and I was working with my mentor, Sherry Ford, who I mention all the time, who was my therapist at the time. And she did a guided meditation. I don't think it was necessarily intended to be a past life regression. It just sort of worked out that way. And in the moment, I did not realize this was a past life. I just thought it was like a really lovely vision. So she walked me through this meditation where you kind of came out from the earth and sort of got some distance, and then you came back into the earth and just kind of looked around to see what was happening. And I arrived on this beach next to a jungle, and I realized that I was a different person. I was in this beautiful indigenous body, this woman who had really long dark hair and this beautiful like caramel colored skin, and I was completely nude, and I was with a horse, and I felt this sense of total freedom. And again, at the time, I just thought this was sort of like a vision. And I was like, oh my gosh, this seems so wonderful. You know, this idea of being free and communing with the horse and being surrounded by all this beauty and nature. I just had this really like amazing sense of being free. And I didn't really think much about it. And then a few years later, I was back in Oklahoma, no longer as her therapy client. My brain went totally blank there. We were sort of, at that point, we had sort of been apart for a while and had come back together kind of as friends, or I would call her my mentor. And this is a little bit of a sidetrack, but just to kind of explain how powerful these past lives can be, I had a really traumatic memory of a completely different past life. The details of this are not important and might be triggering. I don't want to get into this in this particular episode, but this came through. I knew it was a memory, and I freaked out because I didn't understand past lives at the time. And I thought it was a memory that happened to be in this life. And I was so confused because I was thinking, you know, is this something I buried? Like, is this something that possibly happened, to the point that I was like kind of reaching out to people around me in my childhood. Like, do you have any sense that this might've actually happened? And who might this have happened with? And it was very weird because I knew it was a memory, but I couldn't find it. And so I went to Sherry and I said, I don't understand what's happening. This is what's going on. And she said, that sounds like a past life memory. And I was like, what? And she was like, a past life memory. So I started doing all of this reading. I started reading Brian Weiss. It's Weiss. He's written a lot of books about past life and past life regression. And he was a psychiatrist who started discovering these past lives with his patients and was a skeptic at first, didn't really believe it. And then sort of his life's work kind of turned into delving into this past life stuff and resolving it. So that was my first experience of having a past life memory that I knew was from a past life that I figured out. And this is very much a process of excavation, because for most of us, these things, they first come through kind of like in a muddy way or in a brief way, like that experience I had with the guided meditation. And like sometimes we don't revisit that for many years, or sometimes little pieces of the puzzle are given to us until we have a deeper understanding. That is exactly what happened with this woman that I was. So that guided meditation, that was my first human life, I believe now. That may change in the future. I may get knowledge that I don't have now. That's always possible. But I believe that was my first life. And the practitioner that helped me kind of work through this karmic clearing, she called it the karmic seed, meaning like the very first, the origin of your karma as a human. And so over the years, I became more connected with this woman. I got more information about her. And I'm going to tell you a little bit of that. And then I'm going to tell you how I got more information that kind of changed my understanding of this, that led to this huge karmic clearing and why it's so important. So over the years, I gleaned more information, through visioning or meditation or being visited. And I realized that this woman, I'm pretty sure I can see it on the map. It was Peru. And I looked at Peru to see where the indigenous cultures were that would have been closest to the ocean. And this was pre-Incan. I think this was a couple thousand years ago. That's about how long ago it seems like it was. The wind is blowing really strongly. There, a big gust just came, and all the dogs looked up, and I also was like, "What is happening?" Confirmation. So I was a medicine woman in Peru, I think about 2,000 years ago. And in that lifetime, I came in knowing exactly what my quantum origin was. I knew that my quantum origin was seraphim, was angelic. And I came in, what I thought for many years was that I came in to try to help people, to bring the dimensional frequency expansion energy to people. It didn't have that name at that time. And I was a singer, and I remember singing. And when I sing in this lifetime, I sometimes connect to the sounds that came through. And people will say this sounds really like indigenous, or I've had people say, my grandmother was Mayan and she made sounds that sounded like this, and it it's a channeling that is connected to that lifetime. These frequencies come through, they're coming through me. I'm the filter through which the frequencies come. So all of my experiences lead to what comes through, because the frequencies in the seraphim realm, I cannot reproduce exactly in this reality. Last night I had a beautiful guided meditation with sound, and I was using the bowls along with my voice to try to closely mimic as much as I could what I hear when I go to the celestial realm. I hear all of these layers of sounds. I can't necessarily reproduce that, but I can call the energy through and approximate it, and then people have really amazing experiences, which is always just a huge joy for me. So in this lifetime, I was a medicine woman, and I used my voice to heal people and to help people shift spiritually. That was the first kind of bit of information that came through. And then at a certain point, I realized that this version of me had a baby, had a son, and that the tribe had sacrificed this baby. And when I was communicating with this woman, that's the other interesting thing, because this happens even after people die. When you are communicating with someone who is tied to a specific personality, especially a human personality, but this includes star seeds, things are coming through their filter. Now I realize why I just said that. So you sometimes have to take things with a grain of salt, because they are telling you their version of the story, which comes up in this experience in a really big way. So this woman told me that she had a son, and that they took her son away and they sacrificed him because they thought his blood would have more potency, more power, because of who she was, because of her spirituality, because of her status in the tribe. And I've actually did a little bit of online research, and they did, this area that I'm looking at in Peru, they did do child sacrifice, specifically, especially of male children, and they would take the children away at birth. Sorry, this is really triggering, so if you don't want to hear about this, I'm just going to very briefly say this is supported by actual facts. I'm not going to go into the details because I don't want to make anybody really upset. But I know that this is something that actually happened, because sometimes when this stuff comes through, it's like, am I making this up? Is this real? And, we can't necessarily ever verify things exactly, especially from that long ago. But I do know that that is a practice that was common in this area of Peru at this time. And so I always had so much compassion and empathy for this woman, because I've had a long battle of infertility and 12 miscarriages. And I also have multiple other past life memories of losing children, of children having an illness, of children, having stillbirth, like all of these. It seems to be a theme throughout many of my lifetimes, this idea of wanting to have children and sort of not being able to have them, or having them taken away or something like that. And so this is kind of the foundational information I had when I went into the session where I was receiving. And in the course of this session, first of all, I was feeling really off. And I talked about this on one of the shows. I talked about feeling really off and struggling and not quite knowing what was going on. to the point that when I went to see this practitioner that I usually see about once a month, she said, "You don't even look like yourself." And I was like, "I don't feel like myself. I don't know what's going on. I'm stuck in this serious self-doubt with all of this fear coming up." I talked about that on a couple episodes of the podcast, really struggling with feeling unworthy, with struggling to kind of speak my truth, with struggling to kind of expand my vibration and be open and expressive about who I am and my angelic origins and things like that. And I didn't realize that there was karmic baggage in the way that was causing all of that. And I could feel like I didn't understand why I was struggling so much. I was like, I've done all this work and I've done all this excavation and I just don't understand. And when I got on the table, my body was totally locked up. Like she couldn't really get in. And it's very interesting over the course of this session, I had to just direct my guides to give her information because I was not getting much information. It was coming through in little like bits and starts, and especially the sort of the deeper layer that we'll talk about maybe in another show, I was completely blocked from. This is why we need each other. You can go back to the last episode where I talked about that. We need other people to hold space for us. No matter how much work we do on ourselves, there's always going to be expansion to be found when someone else is holding the space. So all of a sudden, I got a bunch of new information about this woman, and I recognized this, what the practitioner called this karmic seed. So this woman had told me that they sacrificed her son because of the potency of his blood. And that was part of the truth, but it was not the whole truth. So what had happened that I saw come forward in this session was that this woman had essentially had an affair with the chief's son. So he was partnered with another woman in what appeared to be kind of a exclusive monogamous relationship. I don't know if they called it marriage. It doesn't really matter. They were committed in a way that they were not supposed to be with other people. And she fell in love with him and she had an affair with him and she got pregnant. And all of a sudden, I had a whole piece of this story that was missing, which was that part of the reason they took her son was because of this transgression. It was not just because he was a powerful individual, which was making me afraid of my own power. It was because she had broken the rules. She had committed a transgression against their social contract. And it wasn't necessarily to punish her. It was to give her the consequences of her actions. It wasn't punitive. They may have taken him anyway. I don't know. But this was a huge part of the story that I was missing. And as soon as I started realizing this, my body started unlocking. And I realized that this woman, this other personality, that's still a version of me, we're connected to the same soul, serving the same higher self. She has been in my body. She has been in my energetic field, in my body, to the point that I started to question all of these decisions I had made. And the hardest one was, did I even want children? Because all of a sudden I saw this thread through all of these lifetimes of this woman coming back over and over again and sort of hijacking these other personality selves' free will to her own devices, not out of malice, not out of spite, out of this sort of misguided attempt to do things better, to do things over, to get her son back and do better by him. And it was really emotional and really powerful to have this realization, because then I had this thought all of a sudden, like, no wonder I don't feel like myself. I don't know that I have been truly Paula myself since about 4. And it's very interesting because I've been working a lot with that inner child version of myself, and she would not reintegrate. We're working on it still now. She's always sort of like standing off to the side with her arms crossed, kind of like seemingly a little bit judgmental, like, I don't know what happened to you. Like, you're not me. And I just thought, and there is not a black and white answer here. Like, yes, I had a lot of cultural programming and societal programming and family programming and trauma and all of the stuff in this lifetime. That's what I always thought was in the way. And it was. This, again, this is not a black or white thing. I had to excavate through all of that to get to this thing that was deeper. But it was very interesting because I had gotten to this point where I'm like, I don't know what's left. I feel like I really have shifted so much. Why am I stuck? Why can't I step into my power? Why can't I shine my light as brightly as I know I'm meant to, as brightly as this little version of myself? She's standing off to the right, by the way. That's why I keep pointing. Still with her arms crossed, just like, I'll believe it when I see it. So all of a sudden, I had this memory of when I was doing the infertility treatments and having all the miscarriages. I was seeing a practitioner who I've actually mentioned on the show before, who I ended up was not operating for the highest and most benevolent good overall, but things are complex. That doesn't mean that they never have something, they never serve you in a way, or that there's not glimpses of higher service. And one of the things this person asked me at a certain point was, are you sure you really want to have a child? And I was like, I was like insulted by the question. Like, well, yeah, obviously, why would I be doing all this if I didn't want to have a child? And then they said something like, are you sure your husband wants to have a child? Like, there's definitely an energy here that doesn't seem to really want a child. And now all of a sudden I'm like, oh, that was 4-year-old Paula who did not. 4-year-old Paula wanted to go on Star Search and be a singer and be a star and shine her light and go out and like vibrate the way she was meant to vibrate, which my only understanding at that time was to be a professional singer. Now I understand there's a whole different way to do that, and I'm stepping into that, and she and I need to integrate that. This idea of healing with sound, didn't really exist, only on the very fringes at that time. So I just thought I was meant to be a performer. And I had this really visceral understanding that this inner child version of myself was trying to serve me by blocking these pregnancies that kept trying to come in. And that's not the only part of this. Like, everything's always complex. But I had a moment, like I've told this story to a couple people, and they're like, wow, that must be really devastating. And I think that's part of the reason this didn't come through until now, because I find it so freeing. And if this had come through 3 or 4 years ago, 5, 6 years ago, in the midst of this journey, I would have not been able to receive this in a way that it was helpful. And I had a moment of like, oh my God, has any decision I've ever made like been mine? But you could say that about so many different things. You could say that about the cultural programming and the family programming and all of that stuff. That's one of the reasons that we excavate and clear, is so that we have a connection to who we really are, to what we're really here to do. And I knew that at a very young age, and I had no doubt, maybe a little bit too much no doubt, to the point of like needing some humility and things like that. But I had totally lost the connection to that version of myself. So all of this lack of confidence and lack of self-worth and self-doubt and all of this was coming through from this karmic seed of this woman who made a tragic mistake. There's more to the story than that. There's a deeper layer than that we'll get into in another show. But essentially made a tragic mistake, made a bad decision, got bamboozled, essentially. More on that later. And it affected every single life since, including this one. That is why karma is important. That is why karmic clearing is important. So as I recognized this, first of all, I had a little bit of like a reckoning with this woman. Like, you do not belong here. This is my life. This is not your life. This is your karma. This is not my karma. I get to clear this from my system. You have to figure this out, but not in this physical body, because I know what I'm here to do, and it's time for me to do it. And I had to have her leave my field. And she's hanging out in my energetic sanctuary in the healing cave. We've been sort of meeting because she is a version of me. She's a past version of me. We're connected to the same soul. And there's healing there to be done. but I don't have to carry her karma. It's not my karma. She created it. I no longer have to suffer the consequences of that. She has to figure that out in an energetic way, in a karmic way. I don't have to have that karma in my field. That is what the karmic clearing is. And as soon as I had her leave, and then there's a deeper story of another energy that I had to have leave, I felt like a completely different person. Doesn't mean I don't still have some doubts. It doesn't mean that I'm not still socially awkward and neurodivergent and extroverted introvert, as I was talking about with someone last night. But that deep seed, karmic seed of self-doubt and self-worth issues and fear of my own power, totally gone. And all of a sudden, this young version of myself is like, oh, I remember you. Do you remember me? And then I try to integrate her and she's like, it's all soft in here. And I don't know if I like it, because she was separated out so long ago. It was essentially a self-preservation technique. It was like this other energy is sort of taking over. I'm going to separate myself out so that someday I will have a chance to remember who I really am. And that version of myself is not perfect, just like no version of ourself is perfect. But that is truly me. That is who I am. That is who this personality Paula self is. And there was no way for me to reclaim that fully, to reclaim my power, to reclaim my confidence, to reclaim my sense of self-worth until I cleared that karma of this other version of myself from my field. It has changed everything for me. And I'm seeing that reflected in the vibration that the universe is showing me. And it's not easy, and it's taken some time. That's partly why it took me a while to talk about it, because it's a lot to wrap your head around conceptually. It was a lot of energy to move. So it really knocked me down. Like, there was a lot of integration work, which usually looks like rest and sometimes a little bit like exhaustion and fatigue and flare-ups of chronic things and depression and, just a lot of feelings. What I will say is that because I do this so often, the emotional stuff moved through almost instantly. Like, I was ready for that. But the physical body is slower than the pure energy. And so it's taken me a little bit of time. This was a few weeks ago, and I've had to really rest a lot. Even today, I went into my office, saw a client, had to come home and lie down before I could even eat lunch and do this episode. Hopefully that illustrates this is a very extreme story, and it's a great illustration. Not all karmic clearing is this black and white, is this obvious, is this intense. A lot of times it's just little layers of things that need to go so that we can fully claim our own power. So every single life we lead is completely unique. There will never be another Paula Schlax Taylor. And I know what I'm here to do, and I've known it from a young age, just like that very first version of myself did. I think she was supposed to be here a little more to observe and not necessarily to heal, or maybe it was a mix. We are connected in that way. That part of my call to service has remained, or I kind of wandered off a path. She took us off the path by kind of hijacking all these other lives and focusing so much on trying to have children. I'm not sure I was ever meant to really have children as a seraphim, as that is my quantum origin. I think it was it was so cute. It was coming up in the session as this like Star Trek Prime Directive, which is this idea of like observe, but do not interfere. And I've been to all the places, sometimes mostly with my guide Jay, for a lot of lifetimes, not human lifetimes, but quantum origin lifetimes, just to have the experience of being that version of the infinite, that version, that differentiation of this beautiful divine source that has turned into all sorts of different energies that we get to experience in all different places and in all different ways. And I think for most of those lifetimes, it was like about having an experience but not necessarily becoming of that energy. And something about being human called me in, and I've just been coming back over and over again. But now I realize it was that karmic seed that's been pulling me back over and over again. And I could have chosen perhaps to come back to do service. Like there was service as part of that first lifetime. But as soon as I got pregnant to have this child, I stepped out of what my soul was here to do. It was like a side quest. It was a distraction. And believe me, like, I'm not saying that having children is a distraction. It's a beautiful, fulfilling thing. I'm saying for my higher self, that was not really ever, I don't think, supposed to be part of my journey. And this version of myself did not want to accept that and fought it over and over again, including in this life, for many years of this life. And so I could be angry about that. I was telling this story to my mom, and she's like, "Ooh, that beam." And I was like, I don't feel that way, because she wasn't doing any of this out of malice, and she was tricked. We will get into that in a different show. She was just doing the best she had with the information she had at the time, doing the best she could. And that is what most of us are doing. Most of us are deep into all of this programming, this energetic baggage, this karma that came from all of these different places. And we have little access to the free will, to the responding, because we're in these deep sort of autopilot programs. And part of what I think a lot of us are here to do at this time is clear that old baggage, those old programs, so that we can remember who we really are, so that we can decide what we're here for, so that we connect with that, so that we can start that service. Maybe that's why I'm so obsessed with service. And I always talk about service in this life, because you're serving that higher self that came here for a reason and then got lost along the path somewhere. And there's nothing wrong with meandering. I don't have regrets about this. I have like a smidgen of like, man, I wish I'd found this earlier. But I also have a full understanding that like I wasn't ready to see it until 3 weeks ago or whenever it was. I didn't have the tools to support myself, to shift. And I can feel this expansion that is calling me so much. And I will say right now, I didn't know I was going to get emotional at this part. This is all because of sound. This is all because of vibration. I've been doing energy work for 20 plus years, but until I started stepping into the physical vibration of sound, using my own voice especially, immersing myself in the beautiful sound of the bowls and the interaction with these amazing beings that come here just to serve, I wasn't ready to receive this. I wasn't ready to make this shift, and now I am, and I know I have something to do. And it's so interesting because every time I kept checking in with my guides, they just kept telling me, you need to focus on this retreat. Join me in Cambodia in November. The registration is so close. More information is coming to the website, to the events page, paulataylorenergy.com/events. The reason they've been pushing me is because they knew that this is what was going to push me through this resistance, to be able to hold the space that I need to hold in that setting, to be able to offer the expansion that people are looking for in that setting. So ultimately, I have no regrets. I have this sense of peace. I have this sense of calm. I have this sense of remembering who I am and reintegrating that super obstinate, belting out tomorrow from Annie, 3 to 4 year old version of myself is not quite ready to come back in yet, because she doesn't trust that it's safe. And I've got to just keep letting her know it's safe to come home. And we are here to do what we're here to do, and we know it, and we're ready. That is the importance of karmic clearing. So once again, if you are enjoying the show and you want more interaction and you want to be able to ask me a question and have me answer it in a bonus episode, that's what we did last week. You want access to the activations, very powerful activation last week where going to do another one this week. Join us in the Spiritual Awakening Sanctuary. It's only $11 a month. There's a link in the podcast show notes to join us. This is a multifaceted, multi-layered subject. This idea of karma and karmic clearing and exploring other lives. And it's not something that needs to be embarked upon with any urgency. It's not something you need to step into if you're not called to. And as you're ready, as you do feel called to it, you might find a lot of shift in this space, but there's no hurry. You are a being of infinite love and infinite complexity, and all versions and facets of yourself are deserving of that remembrance that you are made of love. Have a beautiful rest of your day or evening. I will see you next week for Wind Down Wednesdays.